Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Municipalities are interesting entities. A city/county is in the business of running our neighborhoods, carrying out policy that in large part is set by state legislators. Sure, local governments set taxes, enforce law, carry out citizen and business requests, but the gravitational pull of a state's General Assembly cannot be denied. Happy summer. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and 4 of the region's county managers/administrators are up next. Mecklenburg, Wake, Richland, and Greenville County will wade into the Carolinas' hottest issues.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Joe Kernell, County Administrator of Greenville County, Tony McDonald, Administrator from Richmond County, Jim Hartman, Manager of Wake County, and Dina DiOrio, Manager of Mecklenburg County. Now, here's Chris William.
Happy summer. Welcome to our program. Here we go. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. Dina, I'm going to start with you since you're closest. You know, we talk about education, we talk about the challenges in transportation, we talk about airports, we talk about social issues in a county. Dina, what do you think the single largest issue that you as a manager and maybe your elected officials face? What is the issue?
Well, I think you mentioned it a little bit in your opening, and that is sort of the work of the General Assembly and what they do to impact our ability to manage our own affairs. And we have a lot of initiatives at the General Assembly now that we are very concerned about and will hurt our ability to manage our own growth in the future.
You know, I wouldn't expect you to intentionally step into the line of fire when we talk about the General Assembly. And Jim, you're not, by the way, you're up next on this same question. I just want to give you a fair warning here. There's been some criticism about in North Carolina that the GOP's General Assembly has overstepped some authority when it comes to local politics and local policy. Do you get that sense? Do you get that the General Assembly is mandating more than they have been in past years?
I think they are getting involved in local affairs more than I've seen since I've been in North Carolina. And again, it really hurts our ability to manage our own growth. It takes away our flexibility, and we are very concerned about that.
Jim, do you get the sense being near Raleigh and around Raleigh?
Absolutely. You know, I've only been in the state for a little over a year, but I think there is a clear need to have more home rule and more understanding of what especially the largest economic engines of the state are doing so that we can help the entire state prosper. I would say that, you know, growth is probably the number one issue that I work on to prepare for the future. We're growing by 62 people a day. 250,000 new people are expected in the next decade, and we just hit 1 million people. So,
and this is in Wake County.
This is in Wake County. So in order to maintain our quality of life, we got to stay on that, and we're going to need help from the state legislature.
Yeah, Tony, what do you think? You've heard this. What's your single largest challenge? Is it growth?
I think growth certainly is one of our major issues that we're dealing with right now, and I'm sure every community in North and South Carolina, across the Southeast and the nation, I'm sure, are dealing with the same issues. We also are dealing with our legislature and legislative issues like you're talking about, where we continue to get programs pushed down to the local governments, to counties, or mandated to counties, where we are required to do certain things or provide certain services to citizens, but we don't get the funding from the state or from the legislature to support that. So that creates a problem for us in South Carolina, and I think even larger or compounding that problem in South Carolina is we have a limited ability to raise taxes. We have legislation that everyone in South Carolina knows by Act 388, which limits the amount of property taxes you can raise from one year to the next. So we continue to get mandates from the state, yet we don't have the ability in many cases to fund it when the state legislature doesn't give us the funding along with the program.
Why do you think, Joe, why do you think that there's been, some folks have called it an overreach, not just from Raleigh and the General Assembly, but the State House in Columbia. Why do you think there's been an overreach in the way of this policy?
Well, you know, all the issues that Tony spoke about mandates that we have to provide with no funding. In fact, it's gone the opposite way. The funding has decreased. When the state had their budget issues, they actually pulled back. At least in Greenville's case, it was millions and millions of dollars. And over the years, we have lost millions and millions of dollars of state mandated activities that we've had to replace, but then they've capped us on what we can do with taxes. Now, Greenville County has not raised taxes in 23, 24 years, so that's not an option for us. So we have to stay within our means and get creative. But transportation is our big issue right now. It's mainly state roads, state-maintained roads.
Yeah, before we leave, and I promise I don't want to talk the whole program about what Columbia or Raleigh are imposing on all the municipalities and the counties, but just one more question on this. So do you, to your point, Joe, do you think that there has been fiscal austerity when it comes to operating government, and that's what's driven maybe some of this overreaching by the State House to places like Greenville County? Or is there something else behind the big brother type of mentality?
I think it's just from history, where they've always had some control over local government and they don't want to let go of control over local government. Whereas we have our elected officials, our county councils, that can set policy, can direct county government, but the state just can't let go of it.
Yeah.
Well, I think in our case, it's a change in political philosophy. In North Carolina, we saw a change in the leading party of both houses in the General Assembly, and that clearly has changed the philosophy and how they're behaving at this point.
Yeah. Okay. Let's Jim, you said something about growth as your single biggest issue. Growth can be synonymous, but not the same as transportation, transit, infrastructure. In Wake County, in Mecklenburg County, in all your counties, but specifically with you in Wake County, it's how do you manage transportation when transportation issues certainly are important? There's a new funding formula from the governor. There's a new austerity idea that the Republicans have brought in. There's talk about and real move in tax reform. So how do you get the transportation needs addressed in that type of environment?
Well, it's interesting for us in Wake County, we don't have a great deal of responsibility, if any, over the road infrastructure. That is mainly a state responsibility and some of the municipalities. And, we've got 12 municipalities within the county, so it's that's where that opportunity lies, and that's handled through a regional planning group and so forth. And I think everybody pays attention at what the county has done with 8 other partners is launched a transit planning process. We've had a number of those occur over the past 15 years or so. None of them really got the traction necessary. So we're focusing on transit, commuter rail, rapid rail transit, enhanced bus transit, and doing this, trying to create a plan for later this fall that we can hopefully take to the voters next year.
Go ahead, Dean.
Well, I think Mecklenburg County, clearly we're ahead of the curve. We have light rail. We're doing our Blue Line extension at this point. We have the streetcar that's getting ready to launch in July. So we've been very successful in being able to access dollars to expand our transit system. Those dollars, though, are continuing to dry up at the federal level, which is where a lot of those dollars come from. And so the future of transit, I think, is something that we need to be concerned about.
So does a county manager's office or a county administrator's office, can you be seen as the honest broker in a dialogue about transportation that is increasingly polarized? Anyone? I mean, is that the place that the dialogue needs to happen?
Well, I think it happens collectively from a regional perspective because.
But who's the lead on it, though, Dana?
Well, I think we all play a role in it. We have a regional planning organization, so we have the Metropolitan Transit Commission, and we all have a seat on that. We all participate in helping to plan for that, and I think it's really a collective effort. It really has to be. Although it's managed by the City of Charlotte, we all feel like we have a stake.
And in Wake County, we did similar effort. We created a collaborative. So we're managing together. So it's the managers of a number of different organizations, including the City of Raleigh, City of Town of Cary, and some of our transit providers. And I think it's a great model to follow because we get to involve so many more people in what become huge plans that need to be understood by the public.
Yeah. Next week on our program, we're going to get back to the growth issue and certainly transit and transportation. Next week on this program, he's the Secretary of Commerce in South Carolina, the Honorable Bobby Hitt, who has had some serious success for the Palmetto State going forward, will be our guest on this program. South Carolina, we talk about transportation and transit and planning and growth, and they all seem to be good problems to have. But when you have new Speaker of the House, Jay Lucas, said on the outset of his administration or his time as Speaker of the House, he wanted, number one priority was to get transportation plan. The session's over without any serious transportation needs being addressed. How do you feel about that, Joe? How do you manage to that? And especially in a state that really is behind when it comes to transit and transportation.
Well, it's got to come to an end at some point. We have to come up with a solution. We've been through it, talked about it in great detail. In fact, we tried to pass a transportation sales tax, and it failed. But we need, and that was to take care of a lot of the state roads also. The local roads are in pretty good shape, but the state roads and the federal funded roads are not. Something's got to come to a head at some point in time.
So when is the tipping point? Tony, when's the tipping point for this?
Well, I agree with Joe. I think we have to take it upon ourselves to do what the state and or the federal government is not doing. And we've done that. We did pass a transportation penny tax 2 years ago in 2012. We had tried it once before that in 2010.
Is this on the county level?
Yes.
Yeah.
We had tried it in 2010. It failed, but very closely. The vote was very close. We revisited it in 2012, and it passed. And it includes construction of roads, resurfacing of existing roads, both in the county system as well as the state system. In fact, our $1 billion proceeds from the total program, $445 million of that will go to state road improvements. So because the state is not taking on that responsibility, we felt that we have to, and someone has to do it. It can't be left undone.
How about the funding formula in North Carolina? Is it? I know the governor has a new funding formula, and it seems to be fairly well received. But how do counties look at that? And Dean, I'm looking at you because there is, of course, big debate in North Mecklenburg, Iredale counties and Catawba counties and going north about this whole idea of a toll road that is extremely emotional. Are toll roads in our future? Is that just something we're going to have to embrace?
Well, apparently, since the ones on I-77 in the northern part of Mecklenburg County are definitely going to happen at this point. You're right, very controversial, a lot of passion around that. But I think there is a need to look at various ways to fund these things, and the toll road is one mechanism through which you can fund transportation expansion in the future. Without that, it's not clear how major transportation programs will get funded.
Yeah. How does that work for 540 in Raleigh?
Well, certainly I-40 is undergoing a transformation over the next many months, and it's going to cause a number of impacts throughout adjacent areas to that. But we've got some beltways to complete as well, and we do have one segment of toll that is in place. And I would predict that there will be more in the future because it is a viable funding source. Many other communities have done it, and what it does allow is it allows any driver to have a choice whether or not to get on that road in order to get someplace quicker.
Does the toll road in the Triangle, has it been utilized? Is it popular? How would you say to places like Charlotte that is debating just the idea of a toll road?
I don't know the numbers behind that because I believe they're under the control of the state and their authority. But it certainly provides that option and has eased transportation in other arterial corridors on the western part of the county.
And what about the Southern Connector in the upstate? I mean, that's a toll road.
That's a toll road.
Is it being utilized? And I know it kind of goes through these phases where, yeah, it's not popular, nobody's going to ride on it. Is it too early for it?
Well, it hasn't really taken off. It's gotten better, but it went through its struggles early on, but it has not taken off.
Schools. You all have some interest in schools, whether it's kind of as a not third party, but second in line after school boards. What is a county administrator, county manager's county role in developing not a school curriculum, but being part of the dialogue about making schools better?
Well, we give them a lot of money. We're we're the other funder for schools in the counties in North Carolina. So I think because there's a separate school board, they are really the ones that are responsible for setting policy and sort of moving school districts forward. So we don't really have a seat at the table when those conversations are happening. But we do try to talk about when we fund them things that we'd like to see the money used for. So that is the way that we try to influence the outcome at the school districts.
How about in Richland County, Tony?
I would agree. We certainly don't get deeply involved into the curriculum or the management of the schools in Richland County, but we certainly can't ignore what's going on in the schools because it is a very expensive item in our budget. We are requested each year to fund to the maximum amount that we can by law the schools' budgets, and we normally do that in Richland. So again, while not getting deeply into setting their priorities and working with their programs, we can't ignore what's going on because of all the funding that we're giving to the schools.
So how do you tweeze out, the debate is and has been in the General Assemblies of both states, has been prioritizing transportation and education. At least they've been the top 3 or 4, that's fair to say. So how do you tweeze out in your budgets when you're sitting around the table with your political leaders? How do you get to the point where the funding is, in other words, how's the sausage made when it comes to prioritizing schools versus transportation?
That's a very difficult and long process. It's and it is a lot like making sausage. I would agree with you. A lot goes into the debate, a lot of hard work, a lot of research, a lot of development as the budget process moves along. Ultimately, what comes out in the end, hopefully, is going to be to the advantage of all categories and all programs, schools, transportation, and everyone else. But it is a very tedious, lengthy process.
Well, managers get the responsibility of providing a budget to their elected boards, and certainly we knew what the schools were asking for. The school board's budget would come in. I would have to make a recommendation on that. And this year, based on there's a lot of growth. We've got 155,000 students in our school system. We've got 175 facilities. We're a countywide operation. We're growing by about 3,000 students per year. It's going to require funding. I proposed a tax increase this year in order to support more funding for the schools.
Knowing that it wouldn't be popular.
Well, actually, it's been pretty well accepted, and but I didn't recommend full funding for the schools. So they had requested an additional $48.3 million. I think my number came in around 34, but the board will be taking that up on Monday.
So let me stay with you for just a second, Jim. So in a neighborhood, in a community like Raleigh and Wake County and Cary and the Triangle, which is not short on opinions and progressive ideas, how does the process, how would you like to see the process when it comes to schools and debating funding for schools? How should that be better?
Well, in many parts of the country, school systems are given the ability to raise their own taxes, and therefore they are accountable to the taxpayers for what they do.
Should it be that way?
I've been in communities where that has been the case, and it has worked very well. I've also been in Virginia as well as North Carolina, where school budgets come through the manager to the board, and they always create a certain amount of tension because you have two elected bodies having to deal with very substantive issues and very costly issues. So that tension just comes natural, and there are other ways of solving it.
Joe, do you see that differently? Greenville County has been through some pretty spectacular growth this last decade. I mean, how do they manage through it?
It has. The school district and the county are separate. They're separate taxing jurisdiction, as Jim spoke about. So we don't get into their business raising taxes or whatever.
So the school board has the ability to raise taxes?
They do it all. They do it all. Right.
And how does that coexist within the county?
It works pretty well. We obviously, whenever the growth is occurring, we want them to cite the schools where the growth is, and vice versa. They want to put schools where the growth is going to occur. So we work real closely with them to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. We've got a couple minutes left, and I want to get into the very mundane topic of economic development, which can be, but I know right now in North Carolina, it's a challenge. In South Carolina, you all have been hitting on 8 cylinders and had some pretty spectacular economic development wins. In North Carolina, Dina, how does the state need to approach economic development differently than it is now?
Well, clearly, if you want to compete with South Carolina, you have to have more money really to be in the game. I think that's really, really important. And I think there needs to be a recognition that the urban counties are not competing with rural counties for the same economic development projects. Mecklenburg County is never going to be selected for an auto manufacturing facility. We're competing with Austin and Nashville, South Carolina, for different types of projects. So they need to really have a strategy that focuses on certain kinds of projects for rural counties and different kinds of projects for the more urban counties, and really have a strategy on regional economic development so that we don't sort of pit rural versus urban, which seems to be happening now.
Is there a way to extricate the political polarization from that dialogue?
It doesn't appear at this time. Yeah. Hopefully we'll get there in the future, but there seems to be this very strong urban versus rural divide in the General Assembly, and I think it's hurting the whole state. That's really just my opinion.
Yeah, do you get a sense in this?
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's unfortunate, but it's something that we'll just have to work through, especially with a General Assembly. They've got a new bill on the plate, came out this week, that they'll be working through. It actually changes some of the dynamics. It will not be favorable to large counties and major population centers, and so we'll be watching that very closely. We've got to get it better, or else we'll continue to see folks moving elsewhere.
So even if North Carolina, and I use this term very broadly, fixed its economic development machine right now, how long would it take for North Carolina to catch back up, and not just to South Carolina?
Well, we've got,
in general.
In Wake County, we've got 60 prospects under review and in discussion right now. Some of those very, very sizable.
Is that being held back by incentive dollars that aren't on the table? Because
some have been.
Yeah.
I think that some projects have actually gone elsewhere because the state was not in a position to come to the table. I can't say that with all certainty, but we definitely suspect that. So we've got to get through the dialogue. We've got to get the playing field established, and the state needs to come back on that playing field with local governments. It's imperative for the future and for making sure that this incredible workforce that we have in North Carolina can keep working.
Is the brand being squandered?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
That'll be the last word. Thank you. It's a good way to end it, too, by the way. Very, very non-committal. Thank you all for being on the program. This growth problem is a good problem to have, so I hope we continue to have this challenge. Good to see you all. Happy summer. Thank you for watching our program. Next week, Bobby Hitt. A lot to talk about with South Carolina economic development. How do they keep the momentum? That's probably the biggest word. If you have any questions or comments, carolinabusinessreview.org. We'd like to hear them. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.